Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. Today, we're digging into a really foundational document in information security and privacy, NIST Special Publication 853, Revision 5.
Right. Think of this as a massive catalog of controls, safeguards and countermeasures
Right.
organizations can use to protect their information systems. And importantly, the privacy of individuals whose data those systems handle.
The material we're exploring gives us a guided tour through some core concepts and specific examples of controls across different areas, like managing who accesses systems, how data is handled.
And even securing physical locations.
Yeah. Our mission is to break down these often complex ideas, pull out the key insights from the document excerpts you've shared, and figure out what they tell us about building systems we can actually trust.
And it's great that this publication is available free directly from NIST. Anyone can download it.
Yeah, the DOI is there if you want to grab it. https.doi.org, 10-6028, and ESIP.SP.800-53R5. It's quite accessible.
Absolutely. And the document's structured pretty logically. It organizes controls into families, essentially categories like access control or configuration management.
Right.
Within each family, you find specific controls and then often further refinements called enhancements. The families are just listed alphabetically, controls numerically. But that order doesn't imply priority or anything.
Yeah.
And it includes helpful things like a glossary and a list of acronyms, which are pretty essential when you're navigating this kind of technical document.
Okay, let's unpack this and start with some of those big picture ideas.
Sounds good. A key theme right up front is the relationship between information security and privacy program objectives and how both feed into an organization's overall risk management.
Okay.
The document really emphasizes that security and privacy programs have to work closely together, especially when dealing with personally identifiable information, or PII.
That makes sense. You can't really protect privacy if your security is weak, right? And sometimes security measures might even impact privacy if not handled carefully.
Exactly. So that collaboration is essential for managing both security and privacy risks effectively.
Okay.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The document introduces the combined concept of trustworthiness and assurance.
Trustworthiness and assurance. Okay.
Trustworthiness is about being worthy of being trusted to meet certain requirements. And this applies at every level, from a tiny system component all the way up to the entire enterprise.
And trustworthiness isn't just about security, right? The outline mentioned it covers things like reliability, performance, resilience.
That's right. Reliability, dependability, performance, resilience, safety, privacy, security, survivability under adversity. It's broad.
Gotcha.
And for any measures of trustworthiness to be meaningful, the requirements you're checking against need to be, complete, clearly defined, and actually accessible. You have to be able to measure it.
Okay, so if trustworthiness is the state of being worthy of trust, where does assurance come in? What's that about?
Assurance is about building confidence that a system does meet those trustworthiness requirements. Assurance-related controls help organizations define how they build and develop systems.
How they actually do the work.
Right. And generate evidence about what the system does and how it behaves, and then trace that evidence back to specific parts of the system.
So that evidence provides the degree of confidence. Is that the idea?
Precisely. It gives you the confidence that the system is meeting its security and privacy requirements and still supports the organization's mission. It's about demonstrating that trust is warranted.
The document's glossary sounds super helpful for defining these specific terms. Our source highlights how organizations customize controls using what are called assignment operations and selection operations. Tell us about those.
Yeah, these are fundamental to actually using the document. An assignment is where the organization fills in a specific value or condition required by a control.
Like a parameter.
Exactly. Like if a control says, review accounts periodically, assignment frequency, the organization assigns a specific frequency like monthly or annually. They fill in the blank.
Okay. And a selection is where the document gives options, and the organization chooses one that fits their needs.
Right. For example, a control might say, protect transmitted information using physical or logical methods. Selection. The organization selects whether they will use physical means, like protected cabling, or logical means, like encryption.
So these operations allow organizations to tailor the general control language to their specific situation.
Yep, makes it adaptable. The glossary also clarifies concepts like control inheritance.
Control inheritance. What's that?
That's a really practical concept. It means a system gets some of its security or privacy protection because it's using a service or infrastructure managed elsewhere that already has controls in place.
Ah, like using a cloud provider's physical security.
Exactly. Your system inherits that protection. You don't have to build the data center walls yourself if you're using their service appropriately.
Makes sense. And controlled area is pretty straightforward, just a physically protected space, right?
Right, like a server room or a secure office area where specific physical and procedural controls are in place. Then there's a more privacy-focused term, disassociability.
That sounds tricky. Disassociability.
It is a bit. It's the idea of processing PII or related event data in a way that doesn't unnecessarily link it back to specific individuals or devices.
So you keep the data you need, but break the link to the person.
You minimize its association with an identity beyond what's absolutely required for the purpose. Helps protect privacy if the data leaks.
Okay. And we see domain and security domain. How are they defined?
A domain is a general environment with defined resources and policies. A security domain is specifically one where a particular security policy is enforced, usually under a single authority. They help logically segment resources based on risk and policy.
Got it. The glossary even distinguishes between enterprise and organization. Is that significant?
It shows the scope. An enterprise is defined more specifically as an organization with a clear mission and boundary, using systems to achieve that mission, and responsible for its own risks. Organization is used more broadly. It means the guidance can apply from a small business to a huge federal agency.
They also define core IT concepts like information system and information technology.
Yeah, which just grounds the controls in the practical world of computers and networks we all deal with, and terms like low-impact system.
What makes a system low impact?
That refers to a system where the potential impact on confidentiality, integrity, or availability is deemed low based on a formal standard.
Right.
CETUS 199. This categorization is key because it determines the baseline set of controls an organization starts with.
Okay, so impact level drives the control selection.
Absolutely. Malicious code is also defined basically software intended to do unauthorized harmful things like viruses, ransomware, etc.
Standard terms object and subject are there too.
Right. Passive things like files or objects, active things acting on them like users or processes or subjects. Basic security model stuff.
Operations security, that sounds interesting. What is OPSC in this context?
It's a structured process of identifying, controlling, and protecting sensitive operational information, denying adversaries info about your capabilities and intentions. It's broader than just technical security controls.
And security control baseline.
That's the starting point. The minimum set of controls required based on a system's impact level, referencing another standard. FIPS 200.
Key roles are mentioned too, like the senior agency official for privacy and the senior information security officer.
Leadership roles. Crucial for driving security and privacy within an organization and making sure it gets the right attention and resources.
And threats, obviously central. The glossary defines threat itself.
And related concepts like threat assessment, threat modeling, which is a specific kind of risk assessment modeling attacks and defenses, and threat source, where threats come from.
Finally, just seeing the list of acronyms includes things like SCAP, SUM, VPN, USB. It really hits home how this document connects high-level policy to the actual technologies and tools being used and secured every day.
Totally. These definitions give us the essential vocabulary. Now let's take the dive into some specific control families and see these concepts in action.
Okay, let's start with access control, the AC family. This is all about managing who can access what, when, and how, right?
Exactly. The document implicitly starts with AC1, having clear policies and procedures. These need to be managed by someone specific, reviewed regularly, updated. It's about keeping the rules current.
Not just writing them once and forgetting them.
Right. And tied closely to that is account management under AC2.
Right.
This includes things like periodically reviewing accounts to make sure they're still needed and comply with policy.
And having a process to change shared account passwords when team members change. Basic hygiene, but critical.
Very critical. Then there's a fundamental control, AC6, least privilege.
Ah, the classic. Only give people the minimum access they need to do their job.
Precisely. And an important enhancement, AC6-2, requires people who do need powerful access to security functions, think administrators, to use separate, non-privileged accounts for their regular everyday tasks.
Oh, that's smart. So if their everyday account gets compromised, the attacker doesn't automatically get the keys to the kingdom.
Exactly. Limits a blast radius. AC6 also covers periodically reviewing user privileges, AC6-7, and specifying who can authorize access to security functions. AC6.1, or manage those privileged accounts, AC6.5. It's layers of control around powerful access.
Okay, moving to AC3, access enforcement. Sounds like where the rules actually get applied.
This is where the rubber meets the road, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually enforcing the approved logical access rules for information and system resources based on policy.
At the system level, application level.
Right. It's distinct from physical access, which is handled in the PE family. Now, AC314, individual access, is a really interesting privacy enhancement. It requires organizations to provide mechanisms for individuals to access specific elements of their own PII held by the organization.
So people can see their own data, like submitting a request form or something.
Exactly. Or maybe through an interface in an application. It helps individuals understand what data is being processed and ensure it's accurate. It mentions referencing processes like those under the Privacy Act for federal agencies.
And it stresses consulting with privacy officials and legal counsel.
Yeah, to make sure the access methods are right and any limits are legally sound. Very important.
EC4 is information flow enforcement, controlling how information moves, especially between different security domains like different networks.
Right. AC414 talks about using security or privacy policy filters when transferring info across those boundaries. These filters check the data structure and content like file sizes, character sets, field lengths to block malicious or unauthorized data.
Okay, like content inspection at the boundary. And AC422 describes an access-only capability.
Yeah, that's where a single device can connect to multiple separate domains, but the system itself prevents information from flowing between those domains via that device, keeps them isolated.
Got it. AC7 deals with unsuccessful logon attempts. Pretty standard stuff.
The core idea is simple. Limit how many times someone can try to log in incorrectly and then take action when they hit the limit. Stop brute forcing passwords.
And the action could be
Right.
a lockout, delays?
Could be temporary lockouts, delay algorithms, maybe prompting for secret questions, or even a full lockdown mode, restricting logins by IP or user profile, requiring a CAT-BTCH, various options.
And interestingly, it generally doesn't allow automatic unlocking after a time limit?
Not typically, unless there's a specific operational need and it's justified. For mobile devices, a successful login usually resets the counter, and strong encryption might mean you don't need to wipe the device immediately on failed attempts.
AC9, previous logon notification, showing users their last login time.
Yep, simple but effective. It lets a user spot if someone else might have used their account. If the time looks wrong, that's a red flag.
AC12 relates to session termination, building on another control, SC10, how sessions end.
Right. It requires providing a clear logout button or capability for users, SC10.1, and showing an explicit logout message when the session ends, SC10.2. Clear signals help users manage their session securely.
AC17 covers remote access with specific notes on wireless. AC17.3 suggests disabling wireless if you're not using it.
Just reduces your attack surface. Makes sense.
And AC17.4 is about restricting users from setting up their own wireless connections.
Yeah, it requires organizations to explicitly authorize who can independently configure wireless networking and then enforce those rules. Uncontrolled Wi-Fi is a huge risk.
Absolutely. Finally, for AC, we have AC20, use of external systems. Super relevant now with BYOD and cloud services.
Very relevant. It requires verifying controls on external systems or having agreements in place before letting authorized people use them to access organizational systems or handle organizational info, AC21.
And it restricts using company USB drives on external systems, AC22.
And importantly, restricts the use of non-organizationally owned systems, like personal devices, for work, AC23. It doesn't forbid it, but says you must define restrictions.
What kind of restrictions?
It could be requiring specific security controls on the personal device, limiting the type of data or access allowed, using virtualization to isolate work stuff, and definitely consulting legal counsel about the implications of using personally owned devices.
Wow, okay. That AC family covers a lot of ground just on getting in and moving around logically.
It really does. It's foundational.
Let's shift to awareness and training, AT. This feels critical because tech alone isn't enough, right? People need to be part of the solution.
Absolutely. AT2, literacy training and awareness, requires general training for everyone. It needs to cover why security and privacy matter, what users need to do to maintain them, and how to respond to potential incidents.
And it has to be relevant, like specific to their job and the systems they use.
Yeah. Exactly. Including how to handle PII, if their job involves it, and understanding basics of operations security. Plus, the content needs updating periodically after big events like security incidents, incorporating lessons learned.
AT26 specifically calls out training on the dynamic cyber threat environment. That seems important.
It is. Threats change all the time, so training can't be static. It has to reflect what's happening now.
Okay, then AT3 is role-based training. So this is more specialized.
Yeah, this goes deeper. It requires specific security and privacy training tailored to individual roles and responsibilities, whatever the organization defines those roles to be.
And this training is required before someone gets access or starts the job.
Before access is authorized, so they perform those duties, yes. And then periodically after that, plus whenever the system or their role significantly changes. Like AT2, the content needs regular updates. It's about ensuring people with specific duties understand their unique obligations.
Makes sense. Deeper training for higher responsibilities.
Precisely.
Next, audit and accountability, AU. This family is about creating and protecting logs of activity so you can figure out what happened if something goes wrong.
Right. AU8, Audit Record Contents, addresses what information actually goes into those logs. And AU83 has a really key privacy requirement. Limit the PII contained in audit records.
Limit it to what?
To only the elements identified as necessary in a privacy risk assessment. You figure out what PII you absolutely need in the logs for security purposes, and you don't log anything else.
That's smart. You need logs for investigations, but you don't want the logs themselves becoming a huge privacy risk if they get breached.
Exactly that balance. AU9 is about protecting the audit information itself once you've created it. AU91 mentions offloading logs regularly to a different system or storage.
Why do that? For backup. Space.
Both, really. Supports availability, especially if the system being audited has limited storage capacity. Keeps the logs safe and accessible.
AU96 sounds crucial, restricting read-only access to logs to only specific authorized privileged users.
Yeah, you don't want just any admin browsing potentially sensitive logs. And certainly you don't want someone malicious deleting logs to cover their tracks. Limiting access is key.
And AU97 suggests storing logs on a system with a different operating system.
It's a good practice. If the system being audited gets compromised, the logs stored on a completely different type of system are less likely to be affected by the same attack as resilience.
Okay. AU12, audit reduction and report generation, making sense of all this data.
Pretty much. AU12.1 requires automated tools to process, sort, and search those logs based on specific criteria like user ID, file access, time, IP address, success failure, that kind of thing.
So you can actually find the needle in the haystack when you need to investigate.
Makes analysis practical. AU14, Session Audit, has an enhancement, AU14.2, that allows authorized users to remotely view and even hear content related to a user session in real time.
Wow, like screen sharing or listening in. That seems quite intrusive.
It's a powerful capability, yeah. Likely used only in very specific high-risk monitoring scenarios with strict authorization and oversight.
I'd hope so. Finally, AU16, cross-organizational audit logging for shared systems.
Exactly, increasingly relevant. AU16.1 emphasizes preserving user identity in logs that span multiple organizations, so actions can still be traced back to a specific individual even if they move between systems managed by different entities.
And AU16.2 covers sharing those cross-organizational logs with specific partners based on defined agreements.
Right. If you're sharing services or data, you need agreements on how you'll share audit info to investigate incidents that affect multiple parties.
Okay, the AU controls really show the depth needed for accountability, not just recording things, but protecting the records and making them genuinely useful.
Yep. It's a whole life cycle for audit data.
Let's move on to certification, accreditation, and security assessments, CA. This sounds more like process and paperwork.
It involves process, but critical process. CA5 is the well-known Plan of Action and Milestones, or POANM. This requires documenting weaknesses or deficiencies found in systems.
And listing the planned steps and deadlines for fixing them. Basically, a to-do list for security improvement.
Exactly. A remediation roadmap. These POANMs have to be updated regularly based on findings from assessments, audits, continuous monitoring. While mandatory for U.S. federal agencies, any organization benefits from formally tracking fixes.
Makes sense. CA7 is continuous monitoring, ongoing checks, right?
Right. An enhancement CA7.1 suggests using independent assessors or assessment teams to monitor controls.
Why independent?
Having that independent perspective helps ensure impartiality. They don't have a vested interest in the system they're assessing, which reduces potential conflicts of interest. Grading your own homework, so to speak.
The level of independence might vary, I suppose.
Yeah, it's often tied to the organization's overall continuous monitoring strategy and risk tolerance.
Configuration management, CM, is next. This family focuses on managing the defined state of a system and its components, keeping things consistent and secure.
Precisely.
Yeah.
CM6 covers configuration settings, specifying and enforcing the security and privacy settings for systems. CM7 has various enhancements related to this. For instance, CM76 requires separate baseline configurations for development and test environments compared to operational systems.
Ah, so you don't accidentally break the live production environment while testing.
Exactly. Protects production.
Mm-hmm.
Dev test environments can be managed with more flexibility, but ideally, the test configuration should mirror production as much as practical for accurate testing results.
CM3, configuration change control, sounds central to CM, managing any change.
Yep, requires a formal systematic process for managing changes to the system, baseline, procedures, settings, everything.
So proposing the change, justifying it, planning implementation, testing, reviewing results, the whole 9 yards, often managed through change control boards, right?
Often, yeah. And auditing is key, checking changes before and after implementation. CM3.1 requires using automated tools to help document changes, request approvals, and highlight changes that weren't approved.
Catching unauthorized changes.
Right. And CM3.7 requires periodic review of system changes, or review after specific events, explicitly to look for unauthorized changes that might have slipped through.
CM4 impact analyses, enhancement CM4.2 is a crucial follow-up step after a change, right? Verifying impacted controls.
Yes, absolutely crucial. It requires verifying that any controls impacted by a system change are still implemented correctly, operating as intended, and producing the desired outcome after the change is made.
Making sure the change didn't break something else or create a new hole.
Exactly. CM5, access restrictions for change, requires defining and enforcing strict physical and logical access controls just for making changes to the system.
So only qualified authorized people can actually modify systems, using specific accounts, maybe during defined maintenance windows.
Right. Physical controls, logical access, workflow automation, change windows, all part of restricting who can initiate changes.
CM7, least functionality, minimizing the attack surface.
That's the goal. CM7.1 requires periodically reviewing systems to identify unnecessary or non-secure functions, ports, protocols, software, or services, and then disabling or removing them.
Simple principle. If you don't need it, get rid of it or turn it off.
Powerful impact. CM7.2, authorized software, takes this further. It requires defining a list of software that is permitted to run.
Like an allow list.
Essentially, yeah. Organizations can use a deny-all, permit-by-exception approach. This list isn't just applications. It can include APIs, scripts, drivers, everything. And the list must be reviewed and updated periodically. Verification using digital signatures or checksums is mentioned too.
Okay. CM10, software usage restrictions enhancement CM10, adds another layer for risky code.
Yeah, it restricts the execution of potentially risky code, like binary code you got from somewhere with no source code or warranty, to confined environments like virtual machines or sandboxes, and only with explicit approval from specific personnel.
Helps manage risk from third-party or open source code where you might not have full visibility.
Exactly. CM8, system component inventory. Knowing what you have.
Yeah.
Identifying, documenting, and maintaining an inventory of everything that makes up the system: hardware, software, firmware.
And this inventory needs enough detail for accountability names, owners, versions, licenses, network addresses.
Right, and it must be reviewed and updated regularly. CM8.9 is specific, requiring components to be formally assigned to a system and getting acknowledgement from the responsible personnel.
Why is that important?
Because unassigned components, hardware sitting on a shelf, software installed but not tracked, can easily get overlooked, become unpatched, and turn into vulnerabilities. That little detail highlights the document's practicality.
Finally, for CM13, data actions. This sounds like a privacy-focused one.
It is. It requires identifying and documenting all the activities involving PII, collecting it, using it, storing it, sharing it, deleting it, etc.
And you need to know which PII elements, which system components, and who owns or operates them.
Right. Understanding what PII is processed, how it's processed, is it visible to the user, is it just internal processing, and by whom is crucial for assessing privacy risk. Data maps are mentioned as a helpful tool here, often requiring coordination between privacy and security teams.
Wow. The CM family really underscores the need for discipline and detailed knowledge of your environment. It's a lot to track.
It is, but it's fundamental to maintaining control.
Next, contingency planning, CP. This is all
Mhm.
about being prepared for disruptions, right? Failures, breaches, disasters.
Exactly. CP2, the contingency plan itself, is the core. It needs to cover how to restore systems and use alternate processes when things go wrong. Shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be integrated into system design, considering redundancy, backups, resilience.
And the plan needs to align with recovery objectives, how fast you need things back, what level of operation based on laws, risk tolerance, impact level, and the plan itself needs protection.
Right. You don't want your recovery plan compromised. CP6, alternate storage site, requires having a geographically separate location for storing system backups, with equivalent security controls to the primary site.
Off-site backups, basically.
Yeah.
And CP7 addresses alternate processing sites.
Yeah, a place where you can actually run your systems if your primary data center is out of commission, a hot site or cold site.
CP10, system recovery and reconstitution, getting back to normal after an event.
Yep, recovering functions and then reconstituting the system back to a known, trusted state within a defined time period.
Recovery versus reconstitution, what's the difference?
Recovery might just get essential functions back online quickly. Reconstitution is the process of returning to full, normal operations. It's tied to mission priorities and involves steps like assessing the restored system, reestablishing monitoring, maybe reauthorizing it, and learning lessons for next time.
Okay. CP11, alternate communications enhancement CP11-4, focuses on your telecom providers.
Right. It requires that your primary and alternate providers have their own contingency plans, that you review those plans and get evidence that they test them and train their people regularly.
Because if their network goes down, your alternate site might not help much.
Exactly. You're relying on their infrastructure. CP13, alternative security mechanisms, is a fascinating control for resilience.
What does that involve? Having backup security methods?
Yes. Employing defined alternative or supplemental security mechanisms for specific security functions when the primary means is unavailable or compromised.
So if one defense fails, you have another way.
Right. It might not be as effective as the primary, but it keeps critical functions protected. The example given is having a plan to issue one-time pads if your multi-factor authentication tokens are somehow compromised or unavailable. It's about having a fallback for critical security capabilities.
The CP family shows it's not enough to just secure systems. You have to plan for when those security measures or the system itself might fail. You need that plan B.
Essential for resilience. Moving to identification and authentication, IA. This is about verifying the identity of users, devices, and systems. Who are you?
IA3, device identification and authentication. This requires uniquely identifying and authenticating devices, even personal ones, it seems, before they connect.
Yeah, define devices or types of devices before establishing local, remote, or network connections. This is crucial for network access control. You can use things like MAC addresses, certificates, or network protocols like 802.1x.
And the strength of authentication needs to match the risk.
Right. Stronger methods for higher impact systems. The document notes this can be challenging to implement everywhere, so it might be applied more strictly to certain types of devices.
IA5, authenticator management. This covers things like passwords.
Yes, managing passwords, tokens, biometrics, etc. The source highlights the major risk of password reuse across multiple systems. We all know we shouldn't do it.
But people do, so what are the alternatives?
Different passwords per system, obviously, or single sign-on, SSO solutions, or one-time passwords. Rules of behavior and access agreements can also reinforce good practices. IA5.1d discusses protecting passwords themselves using defined controls.
How do you protect static passwords effectively? It's tough.
It is. The document acknowledges the challenge and suggests things like password managers, while also warning that the password manager itself becomes a high-value target and needs strong protection, like encryption or even offline storage for the master password.
Good point. IA6 touches on public key infrastructure, or PKI, for authentication.
Right, using digital certificates to authenticate individuals, machines, devices. It mentions needing to validate the status of certificates. Are they still valid, or have they been revoked? Using methods like CRLs, certificate revocation lists, or OCSP, Online Certificate Status Protocol.
And using a local cache of that status info can help with availability if the network is down.
Yep. It also mentions PIV card validation, which is a specific type of smart card common in U.S. federal government.
IA12 is identity proofing, verifying someone's real-world identity before issuing them credentials.
Exactly. The process of collecting, validating, and verifying user identity information during registration to mitigate threats like impersonation.
And IA12.6, Accept externally proofed identities. What's that?
This allows organizations to trust identity proofing done by another agency or organization, provided it meets a certain defined assurance level. It avoids making people go through the whole proofing process multiple times, especially useful for federated identities or users without specific credentials like PIV cards.
Saves effort and streamlines access across organizations. The IA family is fundamental. Knowing who or what is accessing your systems is the first step.
Absolutely. First step in controlling access. Next, incident response, IR. What do you do when a security or privacy event actually happens?
IR5, Incident Handling, discusses the Integrated Incident Response Team, a mix of experts.
Yeah, experts who can assess, document, and respond to incidents to recover quickly and implement controls to prevent recurrence. The team might include forensic analysts, malware experts, security engineers, privacy professionals, legal, communications, real-time operations staff.
A diverse skill set, and the team could span multiple organizations.
Yes, especially for incidents involving shared systems or external partners like cloud providers. Coordinated response is key.
IR5, Dynamic Response Capability. What does dynamic mean here?
It means having capabilities that can be rapidly deployed or adapted during an incident. Timely deployment of new tools, new processes, replacement systems being agile in response.
Got it. IR510, Supply Chain Coordination. Coordinating response for supply chain events.
Crucial today. Requires coordinating incident handling when the event involves your supply chain, like a breach at a key software provider, or a compromise involving a hardware component.
So you need processes for sharing info securely with partners, reporting obligations defined in contracts.
Exactly. Supply chain incidents can have wide ripple effects, so coordination is essential.
IR6, Incident Monitoring, Enhancement, IR61, requires automated mechanisms to track and analyze incident information.
This is where tools like security information and event management SIEM systems come in, or dedicated computer incident response centers, CRCs, or security operations centers, SOCs. Automation helps manage the volume of data and spot patterns faster.
And IR9, Information Spillage, specifically mentions controls around training, post-spill operations, and addressing exposure, handling data leaks.
Right. The IR controls are about being prepared, being able to react effectively, and critically, learning from security and privacy events to improve defenses.
Let's look at maintenance, MA. Securing maintenance activities seems important but may be easily overlooked.
It can be. It's a critical potential attack vector. MA2, maintenance, includes managing the tools used for maintenance. MA2, review of maintenance tools, requires periodically reviewing previously approved tools.
Why review tools you've already approved?
Because tools used for diagnostics or repair might operate outside the system's normal security boundaries. They could potentially carry malicious code if compromised, or become outdated security risks themselves. Regularly reviewing them helps ensure they're still safe and necessary.
Makes sense. MA4, Non-Local Maintenance Enhancement MA46, requires using cryptography for remote maintenance connections.
Yes, to protect the integrity and confidentiality of those communications.
Mhm.
If you're troubleshooting a system remotely, that connection is sensitive. Encrypting it prevents eavesdropping or command injection.
MA5, Maintenance Personnel Enhancement MA52, has strict rules for classified systems.
Yeah, requiring maintenance personnel to have appropriate security clearances and formal access approvals for the level of information on the system they're working on mitigates risk of sensitive data exposure during maintenance.
Okay. MA6, Timely Maintenance Enhancement MA61, covers preventive maintenance, scheduled upkeep.
Right. Requires scheduled, proactive maintenance on defined components at defined intervals. Inspecting, testing, replacing parts before they fail to improve reliability and avoid unexpected downtime or security issues caused by equipment failure.
MA7, Field Maintenance, restricting maintenance outside trusted facilities.
For certain critical systems, yes. Field maintenance might not have the same level of security oversight or quality control as maintenance done in a secure, controlled depot environment. For very sensitive systems, it might be necessary to bring them to a trusted site for work.
These MA controls show that security extends beyond just the system's operational state. It includes the tools, processes, and people involved in maintaining it.
Absolutely, it's part of the system lifecycle.
Now, media protection, MP. This covers physical and digital media storing information, hard drives, tapes, paper.
Correct. MP4, media storage, requires physical controlling and securely storing defined types of media within secure areas.
So locking things up, basically,
Right.
and keeping track.
Yeah, includes conducting inventories, managing checkout return procedures, maintaining accountability. Secure storage could be locked drawers, cabinets, safes, secure libraries. The level of security should match the information's sensitivity. Less stringent controls might be okay for public or low-impact info.
MP6, media sanitization. Getting rid of data securely when media is retired or reused.
Exactly. Requires using approved equipment, techniques, and procedures to sanitize, like overwrite, or destroy system media until the information is effectively unrecoverable.
What about non-digital media, like paper?
Sanitization includes destruction, shredding, pulping, removing parts, or redacting information.
Yeah.
There are specific standards, like NSA for classified info or NRA for federal controlled unclassified info, that dictate the methods. You don't want old hard drives or documents ending up in the dumpster with sensitive data still on them.
Right. NP reminds us that data exists physically and needs protection throughout its life cycle, even after the system is gone.
Crucial point. Next, physical and environmental protection, PE. Securing the actual space where systems live.
PE3, physical access control. Enforcing who can get into secure areas.
Yep. Enforcing physical access authorizations at defined entry and exit points, verifying who is allowed in and out, using systems like badge readers, biometric scanners, or human guards.
And keeping logs of who went where and when.
Essential. Maintaining physical access audit logs for those defined entry-exit points is part of PE3.
PE3 has enhancements like PE3.4, lockable casings, putting locks on computers or servers.
Yeah, using physical locks on defined system components to protect them from unauthorized physical access and theft. Simple, but effective.
And PE3.5, tamper protection, goes further.
Yes, involves employing defined anti-tamper technologies like special seals or coatings on hardware components to detect or prevent physical tampering or alteration. This is particularly relevant for supply chain risks like counterfeiting or hardware implants.
PE5, access control for output devices, enhancement PE5.2, links identity to getting printouts.
Right. Linking an individual's identity to the receipt of output from devices like fax machines, copiers, and printers often involves authenticating at the device before your print job is released. Prevents sensitive documents sitting unclaimed.
To secure printing, basically. PE8, emergency power enhancement PE8.1, requires an alternate power supply.
Yes, for the system, activated manually or automatically, capable of maintaining at least minimally required operational capability during an extended primary power outage. Could be a generator, UPS, or a secondary utility feed. Keeps things running or allows graceful shutdown.
Right. Protecting the system from information leakage due to electromagnetic signals emanations. Think Tempest standards. Requires technical shielding or other measures.
The PE family is a good reminder that cybersecurity isn't just virtual. Physical security is still a vital layer.
Foundational layer, really. Okay, program management, PM, is next. These controls apply across the entire organization, setting the stage. PM1, Information Security Program Plan, requires a formal document outlining the organization's security requirements.
Yes, a formal documented plan. For U.S. federal agencies, this is a legal requirement under laws like FISMA and the Privacy Act, driven by OMB policy. It ensures confidentiality, integrity, availability, and privacy are addressed programmatically.
So these PM controls provide the overarching framework.
Exactly. They facilitate compliance with laws and policies and apply at the organization level, not just individual systems. And the plan itself must be protected from unauthorized disclosure or modification.
PM5 is another mention of the Plan of Action and Milestones, POA&M, from an organizational perspective this time.
Right. Emphasizing the POA&Ms are key organizational documents, often subject to reporting requirements. They provide an organization-wide view, prioritizing risk response actions consistent with overall goals. They complement the system-level POA&Ms under CA5.
PM9, Risk Management Strategy, requires a comprehensive strategy for managing both security and privacy risk.
Yes, a documented, comprehensive strategy. It needs to include things like expressing the organization's risk tolerance, outlining mitigation strategies, defining acceptable assessment methods, and describing how risk is evaluated and monitored across the enterprise over time.
So, the high-level game plan for dealing with risk.
Pretty much. Driven by senior leadership, informed by internal and external factors, including the supply chain risk strategy, PM30.
PM12, Insider Threat Program, requires implementing a program to deal with threats from within.
Yes. To detect and prevent malicious activity by insiders, it involves centralized analysis of technical and non-technical information. While mandatory for classified info in the U.S. government, the document notes it's valuable for any organization.
What does such a program typically include?
Policies, implementation plans, potentially host-based monitoring, specific awareness training, defined access to information for analysis, and regular self-assessments. A senior official usually oversees it.
TM16, security and privacy testing, training, and monitoring, an organization-wide coordination effort.
Right. Emphasizes an organization-wide process for oversight and coordination of these activities. It integrates continuous monitoring and applies across the whole risk management structure, informed by current threat assessments.
PM21, privacy notices, enhancement PM21 seems very practical for public-facing stuff. Posting privacy policies.
Yes, requires developing and posting clear, plain language privacy policies on external websites, mobile apps, and other digital services.
And they need to be easy to find and understand.
Absolutely. Help individuals make informed decisions, and they must be updated when data handling practices change. Transparency.
PM31, continuous monitoring strategy, requires a formal organization-wide strategy for this.
Yep. Defining the overall approach, including establishing specific organization-wide metrics to monitor, and defining the frequencies for monitoring and assessing control effectiveness, sets the rhythm for ongoing oversight.
Finally, for PM32, critical system function analysis, analyzing systems used outside their intended scope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Requires analyzing defined resources to identify potential exposures when systems are used to support services or functions they weren't originally designed for. This can increase threat exposure or impact mission-essential functions unexpectedly. Need to understand those unintended consequences.
The PM family really lays the groundwork, the strategy, structure, and organizational commitment needed to make security and privacy work effectively.
It's a foundation everything else builds on.
Next up, personnel security, PS, focusing on the people, beyond just the awareness and training we discussed earlier.
Right. PS3, personnel screening, enhancement, PS33, requires extra verification for individuals accessing information needing special protection, like controlled unclassified information, CUI.
So, checking they have valid authorizations and meet additional screening criteria, like background checks.
Exactly. Based on official duties and potentially position sensitivity screening, ensures people handling sensitive data are appropriately vetted.
PS6, access agreements, requiring people to sign something acknowledging requirements.
Yes. Requires individuals to sign an acknowledgement of their responsibilities, if applicable, when they get initial access to covered information. Make sure they understand the rules. The document also notes consulting legal counsel about post-employment requirements.
What happens after they leave?
What obligations might continue regarding sensitive information they had access to. Important consideration.
PS7, external personnel security, extending requirements to contractors and providers.
Yes. Establishing personnel security requirements, including roles and responsibilities, for external providers who access organizational systems or data. You need to ensure their personnel meet your standards too.
The PS family shows that managing human risk requires formal processes for screening, agreements, and extending requirements to third parties.
People are often the weakest link, so these controls are vital.
Let's look at the privacy family, PT. These controls are specifically focused on protecting PII, right? Building on some of the privacy aspects we've seen elsewhere.
Correct. PT2, authority to process personally identifiable information, requires organizations to determine and document the specific authority, like a law, regulation, or policy, that permits them to process defined types of PII for defined purposes.
So you need a legitimate reason to handle PII.
Yes, and processing must be restricted only to what is authorized by that authority. Processing is defined broadly here. Collection, use, storage, logging, analysis, everything. Ensures PI processing isn't happening without a clear, defined basis.
PT6, privacy notice. This builds on privacy risk assessments to guide what goes into the notice you provide to people.
Right. And PT6.1, just-in-time notice, is a specific technique.
What's just-in-time notice?
It involves presenting a privacy notice to individuals right at the moment they are providing PII, or when a specific data action occurs, or at a defined frequency. The idea is to inform them when the notice is most relevant and potentially most useful for their decision-making.
Like a pop-up explaining why you need their location right when an app asks for it.
Exactly. Especially useful for data actions with higher privacy risk, or when practices change. Can be used alongside just-in-time consent mechanisms, too.
PT7, System of Records Notices, SRNs. This is mainly a U.S. federal government thing under the Privacy Act, right? Enhancement PT7.1 requires reviewing routine uses.
Yes. A routine use is a specific type of disclosure exception under the Privacy Act, allowing disclosure outside the agency if it's compatible with the original purpose for collecting the data. Reviewing these published routine uses periodically ensures they remain accurate and compatible. It's about maintaining transparency and compliance for federal agencies holding PII in systems of records.
The PT family highlights the specific controls needed just for privacy, often working hand in hand with the security controls.
Definitely. Privacy requires its own dedicated focus.
Moving into risk assessment, RA identifying, analyzing, and responding to risks.
Foundational process. RA3 risk assessment is mentioned broadly as guiding decisions like how independent penetration testers need to be based on the assessed risk.
RA9 supply chain risk assessment. This seems incredibly important now.
It is. Requires assessing risks associated with the systems, components, and services you get from your supply chain.
And this assessment needs regular updates.
Yes, periodically, or when the supply chain changes significantly, or if other system or environmental conditions change. Supply chain events, disruptions, defects, counterfeits, malicious code insertion, theft can have a huge impact. Analyzing these risks helps identify where extra mitigations are needed.
RA5 vulnerability monitoring and scanning, finding weaknesses.
Right. Requires using tools that can be readily updated with new vulnerability information. The frequency and depth of scanning are guided by the system's security categorization and risk assessment.
And scanning needs to cover infrastructure, network devices, everything.
Ideally, yes. And updating the scanning tools quickly with new vulnerability signatures is key. For custom software, it might involve static or dynamic code analysis. Coverage depends on risk tolerance and how well the tools are configured.
RA56 requires automated trend analysis, looking at scan results over time.
Yeah, comparing results over time to identify trends and vulnerabilities or even potential attack patterns. Sometimes the trend tells you more than a single snapshot.
RA511 suggests a public reporting channel for vulnerabilities, letting outsiders report bugs.
Yeah, establishing a channel where good faith researchers can report vulnerabilities they find in your systems often involves setting expectations, like requesting a remediation time period before they publicly disclose it, leverages the broader security community.
RA7 risk response, deciding what to do about identified risks.
Right, requires responding to findings from assessments, monitoring, audits, based on the organization's defined risk tolerance.
And the options are mitigate, accept, share, avoid.
Those are the main ones. Mitigation means putting controls in place. Acceptance means formally acknowledging the risk and deciding not to mitigate with justification. Sharing might involve insurance. Avoidance means stopping the activity causing the risk. This decision happens before you create a PO&M entry if mitigation is chosen but can't be done immediately.
Finally, for RA10, cyber threat hunting. This sounds more proactive than just scanning.
It is. Requires establishing a capability to proactively search organizational systems for indicators of compromise, IOCs, and to detect, track, and disrupt threats that might have evaded existing controls.
So, assuming breach and looking for the adversary.
That's a common mindset for threat hunting, yes. It's an active defense method, leveraging threat intelligence, and should be employed regularly. It can also generate new threat intelligence.
The RA family is about understanding the threat and vulnerability landscape and making informed decisions about how to manage the resulting risks.
Critical for prioritizing security efforts.
Next, system and services acquisition, SA security and privacy throughout the buying or building process.
Exactly. SA2, allocation of resources, requires that security and privacy requirements are identified early in business planning, that necessary resources are determined and allocated during capital planning, and that security privacy have a distinct line item in budgeting.
Basically, plan for security and privacy costs from the start. Don't treat them as an add-on.
Precisely. Needs dedicated resources. SA4 system and services acquisition covers the acquisition process. SA47 suggests limiting the use of commercial off-the-shelf COTS security products to those evaluated against specific standards, like NIAP-approved protection profiles, if they exist for that technology type.
Provides some level of assurance about the products you're buying.
Right. SA8, security and privacy engineering principles, enhancement, SA8, secure evolvability. It sounds like a key design principle. What is it? It requires designing systems so they can change their structure, interfaces, functionality, configuration without losing their core security properties. Building systems to be adaptable while remaining secure.
So anticipate change from the beginning. Threats evolve, business needs change.
Exactly. Building trustworthiness and from the start and planning for change is much more effective and less costly than trying to adapt security in an ad hoc way later. It's about resilience and reducing long-term risk.
SA9, external system services, dealing with providers.
Yes. Requires providers you use to comply with your security and privacy requirements and employ defined controls. And you need to define your oversight mechanisms and monitor their compliance ongoing.
Can't just outsource the risk. You're still responsible.
Absolutely. SA10, System Development Lifecycle, Security and Privacy, includes discussion about restricting where external systems can process or store your info, partly to help with incident response and legal jurisdiction issues.
And SA10-4, Developer Configuration Management, focusing on the developer's process.
Yeah. Requires developers to use tools to compare versions of security-relevant code or descriptions, checking the efficacy of their configuration management process during development.
SA11, Developer Testing and Evaluation. Enhancements like SA11-1, Static Code Analysis.
Right. Requires developers to use automated static analysis tools, SASC, to scan code for common flaws and document the results. Helps catch weaknesses early, enforce secure coding standards.
And SA11-3, Independent Verification. Someone else checking the developer's testing.
Yes. Requires an independent agent based on defined criteria to verify that the developer's security testing plans were followed correctly and that the evidence produced during testing is sound. Adds another layer of assurance.
SA17, Architecture and Design. Having a security privacy architecture integrated with the enterprise architecture.
Yes. Especially important if you're outsourcing development, you need to ensure the design is consistent with your overall strategy and built in properly from the start.
The SA family really drives home that security and privacy need to be baked into the entire life cycle, from planning and buying to designing and building.
Not bolted on at the end.
Now for System and Communications Protection, SBC. This sounds like the technical guts, safeguards for systems and data flow.
A lot of core technical controls here, yeah. SC2, Application Partitioning Enhancement SC22, mentions separation of system and user functionality and disassociability. Storing user state info separately can enhance privacy. If the system's compromised, maybe the attacker gets the application logic, but the sensitive user interaction data is stored elsewhere, making it harder to link activity back to individuals. As a layer of separation.
SC3, Security Function Isolation, isolating the critical security parts of the system.
Yes. Protecting the integrity of the security functions themselves, the parts that enforce policy from non-security functions, using technical boundaries like partitions or domains.
How do you do that?
Methods include using security kernels, different processor modes like kernel versus user mode, file system protections, restricting access via other controls. SE31 specifically mentions using hardware separation mechanisms.
SC7, Boundary Protection, firewalls and gateways, controlling traffic at the edges.
Exactly. Employing controls at network boundaries or between zones. This includes controls, SC7, to protect against denial of service attacks, filtering traffic, ensuring enough bandwidth, service redundancy.
And SC721 involves isolating specific critical systems using these boundary protections.
Right. Limiting information flow to and from highly sensitive systems allows for stronger protection and limits harm if other parts of the network are compromised.
SC728 is pretty blunt, prohibiting the direct connection of a defined system to a public network.
Generally a good idea for sensitive systems. Have layers of defense, demilitarized zones, DMZs, proxies, etc., not just plug it straight into the internet.
And SC729 suggests separate subnetworks for critical functions, like separating airplane controls from passenger Wi-Fi.
That's the classic example.
Yeah.
Physically or logically separate networks reduce the risk of a breach in a less critical area, impacting essential functions.
SC8, Transmission Confidentiality and Integrity, protecting data in transit. Encryption.
Primarily, yes. Protecting the confidentiality, preventing eavesdropping, or integrity, preventing modification, or both, of transmitted information across internal and external networks. Using physical protections, like protected distribution systems, or logical protections, like TLS, SSL, VPNs.
SC21, Secure Name Address Resolution Service, securing DNS.
Essentially, yes. Require systems requesting DNS lookups to perform data origin authentication and data integrity verification on the responses from authoritative sources. Helps prevent DNS cache poisoning or redirection attacks, using technologies like DNS SEC or DNS over HTTPS TLS.
SC27, Platform Independent Applications, using apps that run anywhere. How does that help security?
Promotes portability and potentially reconstitution. If systems on one type of platform are attacked or unavailable, you might be able to move those applications more easily to a different platform, increasing availability and resilience.
SC28, Protection of Information at Rest, encrypting stored data, enhancement SC28.
Right. requires implementing defined cryptographic mechanisms to prevent unauthorized disclosure and modification of defined sensitive information when it's stored on components or media hard drives, databases, backups, etc.
What kind of crypto depends on the need?
Exactly. Confidentiality needs encryption, integrity needs hashing or digital signatures. Strength depends on data sensitivity. Can be applied at the disk level, file level, database level.
SC30, concealment and misdirection, making systems harder to find or understand.
Yeah, employing defined techniques to confuse or mislead adversaries about your systems or operations. Reduces their targeting capabilities. Examples might include network address shuffling, using honeypots or certain types of virtualization. Adds complexity, though.
SE34, non-modifiable executable programs. Enhancement SE34-2 mentions integrity protection on read-only media.
Right, protecting information before it's stored on read-only media, like firmware chips, and controlling the media afterward. Prevents substitution or reprogramming of the media before installation. Important for supply chain integrity.
SE36, distributed processing and storage. Spreading things out.
Yes. Distributing defined processing and storage components across multiple physical locations or logical domains. Provides redundancy. Increases the work factor for adversaries. They have to compromise multiple places. Allows for parallel processing. Improves resilience and scalability.
SE37, sensor capability and data. Dealing with things like cameras, mics, GPS on devices.
Exactly. Modern devices are packed with sensors. SC37B requires providing an explicit indication to users when a sensor is being used, like the little light next to a webcam.
Prevents covert activation.
Right. SC37C requires verifying that data collected by sensors only goes to authorized people or systems. Even if activated legitimately, the data could still be sent somewhere unauthorized.
And SC37-2, authorized use. Ensuring data is used only for the right purpose.
Yes. Employing measures so data collected by sensors is only used for authorized purposes. The example is GPS for navigation within an app, not for unauthorized tracking of the user's movements outside that context. Measures could include training or contractual restrictions.
Finally, for SC45, System Time Synchronization Enhancement SC45-1 requires syncing clocks with an authoritative source.
Yes, comparing internal system clocks periodically with a defined, reliable time source, like NTP servers. Accurate, synchronized time across all systems is absolutely essential for correlating log entries and reconstructing events during incident investigations. Foundational.
Wow, the SE family is huge and covers so many critical technical areas for locking things down.
It's really the core of technical system protection.
Now, System and Information Integrity, SI. This family focuses on detecting bad stuff like malware and ensuring data and system integrity, right? Protecting against modification or destruction.
Exactly. SI2, flaw remediation. Patching vulnerabilities, yes. Requires identifying, reporting, and correcting system flaws in software and firmware. Key points. Updates, patches, must be tested before installation for effectiveness and side effects.
Test before you deploy. Good advice.
Crucial. And security-relevant updates must be installed within a defined time period set by the organization based on risk. Patch management needs to be part of configuration management too, tracking what's been done.
SI4, system monitoring. Enhancements like SI412, automated organization-generated alerts, alerts from outside the system itself.
Right. Requires alerting specific personnel via automated means when defined inappropriate or unusual activities with security or privacy implications occur. These alerts might originate from sources like suspicious activity reports generated by analysts or insider threat detection systems, as distinct from alerts generated directly from system audit logs, which fall under AU controls.
Okay. SI418, analyze traffic and covert exfiltration. Looking for data sneaking out.
Yeah. Requires analyzing outbound network traffic at external boundaries and potentially at defined interior points too, specifically to detect covert data exfiltration, like data hidden using steganography or being sent out over unusual protocols or ports.
SI6, security and privacy function verification. Checking that your security controls are actually working.
Yep. Periodically verifying that the security and privacy functions implemented in the system are operating correctly. SI6.2 suggests using automated mechanisms to help manage this testing, and SI6.3 requires reporting the verification results to defined personnel. You need to confirm your defenses are effective.
Don't just assume they work. SI10, information input validation. Checking data coming into the system.
Yes. Requires checking the validity, syntax, semantics like character set, length, range, allowed values, of defined information inputs before the system processes them. Invalid inputs should be rejected.
Why is this so important?
Because if inputs aren't properly validated, attackers can inject malicious commands, code, or malformed data. Think SQL injection, cross-site scripting potentially causing data corruption, system compromise, or denial of service. Input validation is a fundamental defense.
SI-12, Information Management and Retention. Managing data throughout its life cycle, including disposal.
Right. Covering the full life cycle, potentially beyond system disposal. Includes retaining necessary information like policies, plans, reports, control outputs based on organizational needs and legal requirements, like an ARI guidance for federal records.
And SI-12-2, Information Deletion. Getting rid of data when it's no longer needed.
Yes. Requires deleting information when it's no longer needed for mission or legal reasons. Holding on to unnecessary information increases the attack surface. It becomes a target for reconnaissance, potential exfiltration, or lateral movement if compromised. Data minimization principle.
SI-12-3, Non-persistent connectivity, making connections temporary.
Right. Requires establishing network connections only on demand and terminating them after the request is completed or after a defined period of inactivity. Persistent, always-on connections can provide stable pathways for adversaries to move laterally within the network if they gain a foothold. Limiting connection duration reduces that risk.
Finally, for SI-19, de-identification, removing PII from datasets.
Yes, involves removing defined elements of PII, like names, SSNs, birth dates, from datasets used for purposes like analysis or research, where the direct identifiers aren't needed.
A privacy-enhancing technique.
Exactly, reduces privacy risk. However, the document wisely notes that re-identification, combining de-identified data with other datasets or using advanced analytics to potentially relink data to individuals, remains a residual risk. So the effectiveness of the de-identification techniques needs to be evaluated periodically.
The SI family is really about active defense, finding flaws, monitoring for bad behavior, validating inputs, managing data properly, and ensuring the integrity of systems.
Maintaining the health and trustworthiness of the system and the data within it.
The last family we'll touch on, based on the source material, is Supply Chain Risk Management, SR. We mentioned RA9, assessing supply chain risks, which is foundational here.
All right, SR4, Supply Chain Risk Management, Enhancement, SR41, Provenance Identity, requires establishing and maintaining unique identification of key elements, processes, and personnel within your supply chain related to your systems and critical components.
So tracking where parts came from, who worked on them, what processes were used, provenance.
Exactly. Gaining visibility into your supply chain activities, the organizations involved, the tools used in R&D, design, manufacturing, acquisition, delivery, integration, operations, maintenance, disposal. Also the development processes, shipping methods, configuration management used by suppliers, and the personnel involved.
Why is this level of detail needed?
It's critical for managing risk and reducing susceptibility to adverse events like counterfeiting, malicious insertions, or disruptions originating in the supply chain. Knowing the provenance, the origin, and history helps identify potential vulnerabilities introduced before you even receive a system or component. The identification method should also support investigations if something goes wrong later.
That sounds incredibly complex, but increasingly necessary.
It's a huge challenge, but vital for critical systems.
So what does this all mean? We've gone through excerpts touching on, almost 20 control families, from access control all the way through supply chain risk management.
Yeah, diving into these specific control families and their requirements, even just through these excerpts from NIST SP 853-R5, gives you a really concrete sense of the sheer breadth and, frankly, the depth involved in building robust cybersecurity and privacy into systems. It's not trivial.
You've seen how organizations need to make specific decisions, those assignments where they fill in the blanks and selections where they choose options to tailor these general controls to their own unique environment, their risk tolerance, their mission needs.
And understanding these building blocks,
Yeah.
like from managing user privileges and enforcing access to planning for system recovery, monitoring for threats, vetting suppliers, protecting privacy through things like de-identification, it makes you, the listener, better informed.
Better informed about the multifaceted challenges organizations face every day, trying to make systems trustworthy in a constantly changing threat landscape. It really shows the depth of requirements needed.
Absolutely. It goes way, way beyond just putting up a firewall or installing antivirus software. It's a comprehensive life cycle approach.
That was a deep dive into some of the core concepts and specific controls from NIST SP 853 Revision 5, guided by the excerpts you shared. We've really only scratched the surface of this massive document.
Oh, definitely. It's huge.
But hopefully walking through these examples gives you a clearer picture of the level of detail involved in building secure and private systems.
So what stands out to you listening to all this?
For me, it's thinking about how these seemingly granular details, like requiring authentication on printers or restricting USB drive use on external systems or documenting every PII data action, they aren't just bureaucratic hurdles.
Right. They are specific responses to real-world security and privacy risks that have been observed over years. The trustworthiness of a system isn't usually built on one or two big magic bullet controls. It's built on the careful, consistent implementation and ongoing management of these many layers of controls all working together. It's that attention to detail.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.